Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Financial Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. All right. So I hope you're enjoying this book. We are more than halfway through. And thank you so much for sticking with us here. In the meantime, while we're on book clubs, you could check out our other book clubs. We have spiritual book clubs on Mondays and health book clubs on Wednesdays. And I'm going to move the camera in a little bit so you guys can see better. If you have a book, you can follow with us there. If not, you can follow with us here on the camera. But anyways, I wanted to let you know that we put out a monthly newsletter that is free for everybody. So sign up for that, and we can keep up to date with what's going on with the Bodega Cat. And also we have podcasts that we put out once in a while. We're releasing one shortly this month, or I try to do it once a month where I interview interesting people. But you could find that on our YouTube channel, the podcasts, or on our website. We have a dedicated tab for that. Yeah, we also put out the previous books that we've read on YouTube, so you could check that out as well. You could listen to it when you go to the gym, when you're in the car, in traffic or whatever. And check out our merch as well if you want to support us. We're working on different designs, new designs for the merch. So you could come back periodically and check out, see what's new. And then if you are local in the Los Angeles area, come and visit us in person. We use technologies based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research for holistic healing for both animals, cats and dogs, and humans. So check that out as well. And then lastly, if you have a book recommendation you want us to read, I'll leave a link in the description box below, and you can let us know, and we'll consider it. We'd love to read. Reading is good. Reading makes you smart. Not so much YouTube videos, although YouTube videos are helpful to some extent. All right, let's do it. With malice toward none, there is one point that is clearly on Lincoln's side. While his political compatriots were howling for economic vengeance against the South, the president stood firmly against it. With malice towards none was more than a slogan with him, and he was willing to risk his political survival on that one issue. The reason he had vetoed the Wade Davis Emancipation Bill was because it would have applied a lien against Southern cotton at the end of the war to the benefit of New England textile manufacturers. The cotton also would have been taken as security to pay off Southern debt, which had been contracted before the war, thus providing the funds to buy back at face value all of the bonds which had been purchased at discount by Rothschild's agent, August Beaumont. Such defiance of the financiers and speculators undoubtedly required great courage. Oh, sorry. But the issue ran deeper than that. Lincoln had offered a general amnesty to any citizen in the South who would agree to take a loyalty oath to the Union. When 10% of the voters had taken such an oath, he proposed that they could then elect congressmen, senators, and a state government which would be recognized as part of the Union once again. The Republicans, on the other hand, had incorporated into the Wade Davis bill the provision that each seceded state was to be treated like a conquered country. Political representation was to be denied until 51%, not 10%, had taken an oath. Former slaves were given the right to vote, although women had not yet gained that right even in the North. But because of their lack of education and political awareness, no one expected them to play a meaningful role in government for many years to come. Furthermore, those taking the oath had to swear that they had never taken up arms against the Union. Since almost every able-bodied white male had done so, the effect would have been to deny the South political representation for at least 2 generations. Under Lincoln's amnesty policy, it would not be long before the Republicans would be overwhelmed in Congress by a large majority of Democrats. The Democrats in the North were already gaining strength on their own. And once they could be joined by the solid bloc of Democrats from the reunited South, the Republicans' political economic power would be lost. Political and economic power. So when Lincoln vetoed the bill, his own party bitterly turned against him. Running throughout these cross currents of motives and special interests were 2 groups which found it increasingly to their advantage to have Lincoln out of the way. One group consisted of the financiers, Western industrialists, and radical Republicans, all of whom wanted to legally plunder the South at the end of the war. The politicians within that group also looked forward to further consolidating their power and literally establishing a military dictatorship. The other group was smaller in size, but equally dangerous. It consisted of hothead Confederate sympathizers from both South and North who sought revenge. Later events revealed that both these groups had been involved in a conspiratorial liaison with an organization called the Knights of the Golden Circle. Oh, that's interesting. Isn't there a movie called Knights of the Golden Circle or something like that? That was Matthew Vaughn's movie. That is very interesting. All right, so there's a footnote about the dictatorship portion. And it says, for highly readable accounts of this movement, see Theodore Roscoe, The Web of Conspiracy, the complete story of the men, plural, men, who murdered Abraham Lincoln. Eaglewood Cliffs, New Jersey, Prentice Hall, 1959. Also, Claude G. Bowers, The Tragic Era, The Revolution After Lincoln. New York, Houghton Mifflin, 1957. Knights of the Golden Circle. The Order of the Knights of the Golden Circle was a secret organization dedicated to revolution and conquest. 2 of its better-known members were Jesse James and John Wilkes Booth. It was organized by George W.L. Bickley, who established its first, quote, castle in Cincinnati in 1854, drawing membership primarily from Masonic lodges. It had close ties with a secret society in France called the Seasons, which itself was a branch of the Illuminati. Okay, so there's a footnote about that. Oops, here. Sorry. Okay, so footnote on that was No Civil War at All, Part 2 by William McIlhenny, Journal of Individualist Studies, Fall 1992, page 18 to 20. After the beginning of the war, Bickley was made head of the Confederacy Secret Service, and his organizations quickly spread throughout the border and southern states as well. Oops, sorry. Move that down a little bit. Okay. In the North, the conspirators were seeking, quote, to seize political power and overthrow the Lincoln government. And that quote was from, let's see here, Horan, page 15. In fact, the Northern anti-draft riots mentioned previously were largely the result of the planning and leadership of this group. And that was from IBIT, page 208 to 203, or sorry, 208 to 223. In the South, they tried to promote the extension of slavery by the conquest of Mexico. And that was from IBIT, page 16. Regarding the annexation of Mexico, also see the Columbia Encyclopedia, 3rd edition, page 1143. In partnership with Maximilian, the Knights hoped to establish a Mexican-American empire, which would be an effective counterforce against the North. In fact, the very name of the organization is based on their goal of carving an empire out of North America, with geographical boundaries forming a circle with the center in Cuba, and its circumference reaching northward to Pennsylvania, southward to Panama. In 1863, the group was reorganized as the Order of American Knights, and again the following year as the Order of the Sons of Liberty. Its membership then was estimated at between 200,000 and 300,000. After the war, it went further underground, and remnants eventually emerged as the Ku Klux Klan. John Wilkes Booth. One of the persistent legends of this period is that John Wilkes Booth was not killed in Garrett's barn, as generally accepted, but was allowed to escape, that the corpse actually was that of an accomplice, and that the government, under the firm control of War Secretary Edwin M. Stanton, moved heaven and earth to cover up the facts. On the face of it, this is an absurd story, but when the voluminous files of the War Department were finally declassified and put into the public domain in the mid-1930s, historians were shocked to discover that there are many facts in those files which led credence to the legend. The first to probe these amazing records was Otto Eisenschmiel, sorry, butchered that, whose Why Was Lincoln Murdered was published by Little, Brown and Company, 1937. The best and most readable compilation of the facts, however, was written 20 years later by Theodore Roscoe. In the preface of this work, he states the startling conclusions which emerge from those long-hidden files. Of the immense 19th century literature that exists on Lincoln's assassination, much of the writing treats the tragedy at Ford Theater as though it were grand opera. Only a few have seen the crime as a murder case. Lincoln dying by crass felony, Booth, a stalking gunman leading a gang of primed henchmen. The murder plot containing ingredients as base as the profit motive. 70 years after the crime, writers were garbling it with a dignity it did not deserve. Lincoln, the stereotype martyr, Booth, the stereotype villain, the assassination avenged by classic justice, conspiracy strangled. Virtue in the ropes of government, emerging triumphant, and Lincoln, quote, belonging to the ages. But the facts of the case are neither so satisfying nor so gratifying, for the facts indicate that the criminals responsible for Lincoln's death got away with murder. And that quote was from Roscoe, page 7. Izola Forster was the granddaughter of John Wilkes Booth. In her book entitled This One Mad Act, she tells of discovering secret records of the Knights of the Golden Circle, which had been carefully wrapped and placed in a government vault many decades ago and designated as classified documents by Secretary Stanton. Since the assassination of Lincoln, no one had ever been allowed to examine that package. Because of her lineage to Booth and because of her credentials as a professional writer, she was eventually permitted to become the first person in all those years to examine its content. Forster recounts the experience. It was 5 years before I was able to examine the contents of the mysterious package hidden away in the safe of the room which contained the relics and exhibits used in the conspiracy trial. I would never have seen them had I not knelt on the floor of the cell 5 years ago and seen into the back of the old safe where the package lay. It is all part of the odd mystery thrown about the case by the officials of the war period. The concealment of these documents and articles, and the hiding away of the 2 flakes of bone with the bullet and pistol. What mind would ever group together such apparently incongruous and macabre exhibits? Here at last was a link with my grandfather. I knew that he had been a member of the secret order founded by Bickley, the Knights of the Golden Circle. I have an old photograph of him taken in a group of the Brotherhood in full uniform, one that Harry's daughter had discovered for me in our grandfather's Bible. I knew that the newspapers directly following the assassination had denounced the order as having instigated the killing of Lincoln and had proclaimed Booth to have been its member and tool. And I was reminded again of those words I had heard from my grandmother's lips, that her husband had been, quote, the tool of other men. And that quote was from Isola Forrester, This One Mad Act. Boston, Hale, Cushman, and Flint, 1937, page, oops, sorry about that, 359. Okay. All right, an interesting comment. One is compelled to wonder, the tool of what other men? Was Forrester's grandmother referring to the leaders of the Knights of the Golden Circle, to agents of European financiers, or was it to conspirators within Lincoln's own party? We shall probably never know with certainty the extent to which any of these groups may have been involved in Lincoln's assassination, but we do know that there were powerful forces within the federal government centered around Secretary of War Stanton, which actively concealed evidence and hastily terminated the investigation. Someone was protected. Interesting look at history, huh? Okay, summary. Just a side note, history, you always want to read history with a grain of salt because it's written from one perspective of one person, and it really depends on the amount of information that you have, because there are many information that we don't know. There are a lot of things like behind the scenes, other people's perception, other people's account that we don't know about. And so even the history that we read is not 100% accurate. That's my opinion anyways. So anyways, read all history with a, healthy amount of skepticism and good amount of grain of salt. All right, that's my 2 cents. Okay, summary. It is time now to leave this tragic episode and move along. So let us summarize. America's bloodiest and most devastating war was fought not over the issue of freedom versus slavery, but because of clashing economic interests. At the heart of this conflict were questions of legalized plunder, banking monopolies, and even European territorial expansion into Latin America. The boot-print of the Rothschild formula is unmistakable across the graves of American soldiers on both sides. In the North, neither greenbacks, taxes, nor war bonds were enough to finance the war. So a national banking system was created to convert government bonds into fiat money, and the people lost over half of their monetary assets to the hidden tax of inflation. In the South, printing presses accomplished the same effect, and the monetary loss was total. The issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln and the naval assistance offered by Tsar Alexander II were largely responsible for keeping England and France from intervening in the war on the side of the Confederacy. Lincoln was assassinated by a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, a secret society with rumored ties to American politics and British financiers. Tsar Alexander was assassinated a few years later by a member of the People's Will, a nihilist secret society in Russia with rumored ties to financiers in New York City, specifically Jacob Schiff and the firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. As for the creature of central banking, there have been some victories and some defeats. The greenbacks had for a while deprived the bankers of their override on a small portion of government debt, but the National Banking Act quickly put a stop to that. Furthermore, by using government bonds as backing for the money supply, it locked the nation into perpetual debt, and foundation was firmly in place. But the ultimate structure still needed to be erected. The monetary system was yet to be concentrated into one central bank mechanism, and the control was yet to be taken away from the politicians and placed into the hands of the bankers themselves. It was time for the creature to visit Congress. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 19. Oh, I think I forgot to announce this is chapter 19, part 2. Sorry about that. All right, let's look at some pictures. We have some pictures here. I'm going to move the camera back a little bit so you guys can see a wider lens. Okay, so this is a picture of President Andrew Jackson. He put his political career on the line in 1832 by vetoing renewal of the charter of the Second Bank of the United States. He called the bank a monster and declared, "I am ready with the screws to draw every tooth and then the stumps." Voters approved and reelected him by a large margin. We can certainly see some parallels to his campaign and President Trump's campaign, right? Or campaign promise, right? So this picture is Nicholas Biddle. Nicholas Biddle was head of the Second Bank of the United States. With many congressmen and senators financially beholden to him, he wielded great political power. He deliberately created a banking panic and a depression for the purpose of frightening the voters and blaming Jackson's anti-bank policy. Biddle declared, "All other banks and all the merchants may break, but the Bank of the United States shall not break." In the end, he lost the contest. The bank's charter expired in 1836. Okay, so this is a picture of the Civil War, or what happened in the Civil War. During the Civil War, Lincoln had an insurrection on his hands in the North as well as the South. These two Leslie's engravings depict the 1863 anti-draft riots that occurred in Ohio, Illinois, and New York. In New York, over 1,000 civilians were killed or wounded by federal soldiers. The Civil War was started over economic issues, not slavery. The war was not popular in the North until the issue of slavery was added at a later time to turn it into a moral crusade. Interesting political move, eh? The Civil War was really an economic, according to this book, the author anyways, it's an economic war, which kind of makes sense in a way. But Lincoln added the slavery issue to it to make it a moral issue that kind of tugs on people's heartstrings, right? Like, oh, you gotta be good. You gotta free those slaves. And of course, human beings are good, inherently good, I think. And so anything that has to do with giving to people, saving people, helping people, we all fall for it, hook, line, and sinker every time. That's just the nature, I think, our nature. Anyways, that's just my two cents. And this is the another picture of the Civil War. Above and below, New York Historical Society. Oh, okay. So both pictures came from the New York Society. Oh, more pictures. Yay. Okay. Wow, this one is a big one. Let's read the caption first, or the paragraph first, and then I'll let you look at the picture. This is the crew of the Russian ship Ozlyaba, posed for this photograph at Alexandria, Virginia in 1863. Tsar Alexander II had dispatched his Baltic fleet to Alexandria and his Asiatic fleet to San Francisco, where they were committed to assist the Union's blockade against the South. This had little to do with freeing the slaves. France had designs on Mexico, and England wanted a divided America. Russia was merely reacting against France and England, who were her enemies. The powers of Europe were deeply involved in the American Civil War for purposes of their own. Without Russia's intervention, the outcome of the war could have been quite different. Okay, so I'm gonna move the camera out a little bit so you could see the picture better as a whole. So this is the crew of that Russian ship, Ozlyaba. These are all the men on it. Wow, interesting, eh? Okay. Now, this picture up here, we're going to read about. So let's read about him. And I'll move the camera back a little bit. Sorry about the back and forth. I hope that's not too, oops. I hope that's not too nauseating. Okay, so this man here, this gentleman here with the hat, cross-armed, he was Montague Norman above. He was the head of the Bank of England during the first years of the Federal Reserve. He is shown here in 1931 aboard the Duchess of York at Southampton. Norman frequently traveled to the US to meet in secret with Benjamin Strong, head of the Federal Reserve. Strong agreed to use the Federal Reserve System to unofficially help Great Britain meet its financial obligations, and billions of dollars subsequently flowed from the US. It was that outflow that set the stage for America's Great Depression of the 1930s. And this gentleman here is William Wentworth. So William Wentworth met Norman aboard ship in 1929. Norman told him in confidence that there soon was going to be a shakeout in the US financial markets. The stock market crashed just a few months later. All right, so this picture here, let me read the copy first, or the paragraph first, and then we'll look at the picture. So this picture is of John D. Rockefeller Sr. is shown here giving a dime to a child, while an admiring crowd looks on. Oh, while an admiring crowd looks on, okay. This was one of his favorite publicity stunts. It was conceived by his public relations staff as a means of offsetting adverse publicity regarding his business dealings. Large-scale philanthropy was an extension of that same technique. So here's a picture. I wonder if it's just one of those famous pictures that he puts out all the time. But that's, anyways, that's John D. Rockefeller with a little kid giving her a dime. And I guess people just love it. Oops, sorry. All right, one more look. Okay, this picture is, oh, let me move the camera back. So this picture is John D. Rockefeller III presents a check in the amount of $8,500,000 to Trigiv. What a name. What the heck name is that? Trigiv Lie. Boy, can you imagine going through life? Mr. Lie, Mr. Lie. Lie through his teeth, lie. That sounds like a stage name to me. Anyways, first Secretary General of the United Nations. The date is March 25, 1947. The money is for buying the land on Manhattan Island, which will house the UN building. Through the Council of Foreign Relations, CFR, the Rockefellers have been in the forefront of the drive for a world government, which is to be built upon the principles of socialism and feudalism. They have no doubt that they and their counterparts in other countries will be in control. Interesting, eh? President Trump recently gave a speech at the UN, I think it was a couple of days ago, where he chastised the governments. And he said, what's the purpose of the United Nations? So they're not doing their job. He says, I do a better job than they do. But anyways, I'm paraphrasing, of course. But a very interesting speech, I think. Very powerful speech. So that's John D. Rockefeller giving this UN guy a check. Let's check. 8.5 million. Oh, more. Okay, so let's read about that first. Okay, William Jennings Bryan, that's the picture on the left. We'll look at that a little bit later, was one of the most powerful Democrats in Congress. He opposed the Federal Reserve Act because it would privately issue money rather than through the government. He was fooled into supporting the bill when phony compromises were made, which gave the appearance of public control and government issue, but which in fact did neither. Bryan was also rewarded with an appointment as Secretary of State. He became disillusioned by the duplicity of his own government and resigned after Wilson failed to warn the public that the Lusitania was carrying munitions. He complained that it was, quote, like putting women and children in front of an army. And then the picture that we're going to look at later was was Alan Greenspan. He was an eloquent spokesman for the gold standard and a critic of the system's subservience to the banking cartel. That was in 1966. After he became a director of JP Morgan and Company and was appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve in 1987, he became silent on these issues and did nothing to anger the creature he now served. Like Bryan, even the best of men can be corrupted by the rewards of politics. Wow, interesting. So just to look at the pictures, this is William Jennings Bryan. He was the Democrat that was very disillusioned about the Federal Reserve and all that. And then this is Mr. Alan Greenspan. Interesting. Okay, all right. Couple last pictures here. All right. So this picture here is the First National Bank in St. Petersburg, Florida. Wow, that's a big bank. Okay. So the First National Bank in St. Petersburg, Florida experiences a run on June 12, 1930. Angry depositors want their money, but the bank cannot pay them. Their money has been loaned to others. This scene has been repeated thousands of times throughout the history and in every country. It is the consequence of fractional reserve banking. And you'd think that the people would learn from past experiences, but we didn't. We still put our money in the bank, which is kind of, people don't know their history. Even if people experienced it, I don't know, that might be different, but I don't know. I'm just kind of it's very interesting to see history repeating itself over and over, right? But anyways, this gentleman here is John Kenneth Galbraith, well-known historian and professor at Harvard, has verified that he was asked to be a part of the team that put together the report from Iron Mountain, a think tank study commissioned by the Defense Department. The purpose of the study was to explore novel ways of keeping the masses in subservience. Wow, that's interesting. It'll be interesting to read that report, isn't it? I think it's probably, I want to say it's public, but I'm not sure. I have to do a little research on that. When a copy of the report was leaked to the press, the government claimed it was a hoax. Galbraith confirmed that it was totally authentic. Wow. Well, as they say, the best way to keep someone enslaved or to control them is to keep them ignorant, right? That's why I think education is so important. Not so much like institutional education, but self learning is important. Reading is important. Reading, when you read, you learn about many different subjects, and you know, it helps you be smarter in a way. I don't know. That's my opinion anyways. but always never stop learning. Never stop learning. No matter what age you are. All right, so that's the end of chapter 19. I hope you enjoyed that, and we will continue next week in our adventure into the creature from Jekyll Island. In the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day. And don't forget to check out all the goodies that I talked about in the beginning of the podcast, or not the podcast, but this episode video, and sign up for our newsletters. So, and check out our website. Okay. All right. Bye-bye now. You guys all have a great day.